one component of a STEM program, which is currently in the planning and discussion stage. And then we also talked very briefly about option 2 with the study hall and the 2 marking periods. But we had spoken about that previously at personnel. And that was it. And we're meeting again this coming Friday.
Could you tell me what the STEM program is?
Well, STEM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. So,
Okay, which is a much broader field.
It
is AP.
well, then AP Computer Science, yeah.
So what you would do is incorporate that into the STEM program.
Yeah.
Okay, I also would like to comment. I think two books for a summer reading program is too small of an amount. And it's been that way for years. I'd like to see that increase to about 4. I think it's only 2.
I believe it's, there's one required reading, and then there's a list of 4 books, and the students select 2 from the list of 4.
So
So
total
if my
3.
math is okay, that would be 3 books total. And I believe the selections are different, whether it's a CP track or the honors track, but it is 3 books total.
And the AP program, is it still 3?
I think sometimes, yeah,
I think
sometimes it's
I think it
4.
also, as you go up grade levels, it becomes, you need to read more books, but, yeah.
Okay, I'm happier if it is increased because I thought it was 2.
If you go on the school website, there's actually a link with the summary list that specifies not just the amount of books, but the books.
They have to go to the office for that.
Yeah.
The phonics books in the elementary classrooms, I think it's great that they have the material. Is there going to be a certain designated instruction time for the phonics, or are the teachers receiving any additional training on how to instruct them in phonics? What are the books going to be used for?
Well, for what Mr. Hunter said in the meeting, it's an integral part of the Common Core Language Arts in grades K through 2. So this is going to help the teachers teach the phonics. And, I don't know exactly how the timing's going to work out. But Sean, did you know more about that?
Can't take it fully out of curriculum.
Yeah.
Yeah, so teachers have received some training in phonics as of now. We've been using it for a couple of years now, but there's going to be more training for next year. Actually, that might relate somewhat to our subject report form, which is on the staff development.
Any other okay, we're up to policy. Susan?
Let me start by moving policy addendum item 1.
Second, Elaine? Find it?
This is a policy met this afternoon, 1 o'clock, so I haven't had a chance to issue the reporting. But this policy is it's a new policy, and it's on direct deposit for employee payroll. And it basically is now a law that the Board of Education may determine to pay all district employees direct deposit. And it needs to be, we're having our first reading tonight, and we'll have second reading next time, as well as a resolution. It has to be once it becomes policy, then it also has to have a resolution passed by the board that we go to the direct deposit. It also has the advantage that we'll be able to also go to electronic W-2s and electronic pay stubs, so it's a green policy as well. So that was our first topic tonight for policy committee did recommend adoption of it. So would you like to do the vote on that report?
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Mrs. Warner,
Yes.
Dr. Beer,
Yes.
Mrs. Cassell,
Yes.
Mrs. McGowan,
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw,
Yes.
Mrs. Richmond, Mrs. Woolridge,
Yes.
Mrs. McHugh.
Okay, I haven't written up any formal report on this yet, and bear with me as I try to get through and report on just a couple of the highlight. I'm not going to go through everything. I'm going to start with, we have a policy that will be coming out for first reading at our next June meeting, and that is the passive breath alcohol sensor device, the breathalyzer. We have a draft on that, which basically provides for the option for the building administration to administer it either to every pupil entering an event or on a regular basis. And once the screen indicates the presence of the alcohol, then it kind of switches into the suspicion-based policy. Because at that point, the student will be determined under the influence and the consequences and the next steps the administration has to take in dealing with that student on a suspicion basis. So there'll be a draft of that coming up for everyone to read before the next meeting. And then we looked at some other clarifying issues. One thing which might be of interest is on the suspicion-based policy, which is the 5530 substance abuse regulation. Mr. McCary recommended changing the list of paraphernalia to include the e-cigarettes, so that we do have that covered, and there could be consequences involved in that. And also under the consequences, adding an ability to assign community service during the suspension period, working with the township community service area that's over there on the Stonehouse. It's a retired police officer that works for the township, and he is been contacted by Mr. McCary, and he is happy to work with the school in providing community service opportunities for students under this policy. Just there's some logistics problems with, they only provide the service on Wednesdays and Saturdays, so we have to look at, when it would fit in more, but it is an option that could be available. Circumstances that would work well. So then, the big one that I want to report out on tonight, and we can talk about the other things in the meeting after I do the report, is we looked at coming out with a draft at our next June meeting on a voluntary random drug testing policy. And in discussing this, we looked at having a goal we could define in using this policy, which we would like to see where we can maximize enrollment in the pool, as it is voluntary, and that the main purpose of the policy would be to serve as an identification tool for the parent, so that they can be notified if their child if they opt them into this pool, if they are randomly tested and they test positive, the parent is notified, and then of course the school can provide counseling and resources to help the student. So this policy is really an identification policy, for the parent, and a resource to help the student to get help. It would apply through grades 6 through 12 in the draft that will come out, and that we were looking at listing, in addition to all the substances, we would also list the possibility of testing for alcohol. We haven't exactly determined, the administration hasn't exactly determined what the testing would be. Standard testing right now is the urinalysis testing. but if there's other testing available, that would be better and still economically feasible. We can look at that as well. And then we came up to the piece within a voluntary system then that has the goal of identification and maximizing enrollment. What do we do as a school system if the student does test positive? So in our discussion with that goal in mind, what will be proposed at the next meeting in the draft that we'll look to you guys is that the consequence for a positive will be that this parent is, of course, notified, and that the student has 3 sessions with the substance abuse counselor, and that they're initiated for further referral. But there will not be any removal from any kind of school activities, related activities. Before the student can return to school, of course, they would have to be cleared by a physician that they're not currently under any kind of influence or have any adverse health problems from it. And that then, after they've completed their counseling, there would be a follow-up test to confirm that they're clean. And under this policy at this time, our discussion led us to, is there really a need to keep the student in the pool? Because under this policy, it is, we've notified the parent and we've provided the counseling. And now, what's the second, and this is a point, we just certainly want to get feedback on. But at what point then is continued testing going to benefit? Because we know the student has been identified, and it's kind of back in the parents' hands to follow through and continue to provide, their child with support to people going through the drugs. So that's the basic gist of where the direction of the voluntary drug testing policy. The conversation today in policy, and that's basically what a draft is looking like at this point. And I'll turn it over for questions or comments.
I would be a little concerned on multiple offenses, that peer pressure and what have you. There is a school, I think, in Hunterland that argued that if they didn't have everybody involved all the time, that the program wasn't going to work. And I think multiple offenses should have some punishment, suspension, because there is a danger if you have drug addicts in the school or drug users, that it's going to affect other students. They're going to pass the habit on. I think you want to look a little closer at that multiple offense. The parents are now involved, you have counseling, but if it continues, I think you run the risk of other students being drawn into it, because they'll be encouraged to take the drugs. That's my 2 cents. I think to give them a pass jeopardizes the program. The first part I have no trouble with. I think that's a great idea. No penalty, tell the parents, trying to encourage counseling. But, if it continues, I think you're jeopardizing other students.
I guess I think one of the things we've heard from most of the people in the community who are looking at this and are concerned about it is that we don't want to punish the students unnecessarily. We really want to get them help. So I'm not on policy, and I really like what you brought out, because I think identification is the most important part, and we do want to have a large pool. So I think this gives you that. I think the problem, we've all talked about this for a while, is that when you have when you take students out of their activities, that's really the only thing we could do. We can't suspend the students for the random drug testing. The only options we have, if we have a secondary, if you test again, is taking them out of their activities, and that's something that I I think a number of us, at least have said up here before, that we're concerned that that might do more damage than actually help the students. So I think, you know, I know in earlier versions of the policy it said second offense, third offense, and what happens, but I like the idea of not doing that. And I guess if you're out of the pool the first year, after you tested, I assume you'd be able to be back in the pool the second year, perhaps. I mean, that's something that I would think would make sense, but I know that's not necessarily what we have now. But I also think, Mike, to your point, the students who've been, who are using are still subject to the suspicion-based policy. So it's not that they couldn't also have consequences. And I assume if you've been identified on the random, there may be, suspicion, you might be looked at more carefully anyway. So it's not that they couldn't get consequences.
That might help me if they were now lined up with.
Well, I don't know.
So, just to clarify, there wouldn't be, the first offense, there wouldn't be a follow-up test as to the consequences to that?
Well, if you take them out of the pool, there wouldn't be another, they have to have a clean test as, from the initial to actually,
2 or 3 weeks, they get retested.
they get retested.
Okay.
And make sure that they're clean.
Right.
After the initial, after whatever we would have to be out of their system, make sure they have to use again during that time period.
And what if the parents want from the pool?
Well, that's a discussion we had, but if the purpose of the policy is to identify and to provide the resources and the counseling and to get the students to help, and then you would have to come up with some kind of consequences for the next time. Which is difficult with a voluntary program because not everyone in an activity may be in the pool. And you have, I don't even know if it says the legal challenges with that. I don't know. But the thing about this is our own local policy. It's not being based on any kind of defined statute that's out there. So we do have a lot of leeway, which I think is great for a change, and to develop something that is customized for us. But I think we do have to be careful on setting up different areas of students within the same program, and then trying to put consequences on them. I don't know if that simplified part of it.
I mean, I guess it's having them not in the pool anymore, like say it's the next year or something, if part of it's supposed to be kind of a deterrent that they might get caught and parents will find out again, and so then if they're not in the pool, are they going to be saying, oh, I'm not in the pool anymore? I don't know, it's making sense to me. I can understand not retesting them chronically all in a row because they should be going, the parents are notified they're supposedly getting help and follow up. I'm just thinking down the road.
To put it back
Years,
here, the
years,
next year.
yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Something we might necessarily thought through in that. Put it back in the pool, if the parents want them to.
First of all, I want to commend the efforts of our policy committee because I know you have spent a lot of time developing these things. What's being proposed sounds very appealing. I'm going to reserve judgment until I actually see it in writing and what the policy looks like. But from what I'm hearing, it sounds like something that I know I personally could support because it's not punitive. It's identifying the students and finding a way to help them, which is what we want.
You didn't think about your policy, right?
No, I'm going to get the rest of the notes out. That was pretty much it. We also looked at, I'll just say real quick. We looked at a homework regulation that, to clarify what a recess period means, because we had some confusion on that during this teacher convention weekend, that some people thought that qualifies as a recess period. So we're just saying the recess period is what is identified in the calendar, or specifically the rules. I already told you about the 2 changes to the substance abuse, the breathalyzers coming forward on first reading, and with some input and modifications, there's going to be something to come forward for first reading on voluntary drug testing, and we already moved the direct deposit, and that was all we got to today. Thank you.
up to advocacy, and I somehow just blanked out and didn't do minutes from our meeting last week. We met the PTO presidents, and we met the new PTO presidents were there, and the outgoing ones. So it was kind of a big meeting. We did talk about the idea of using the data from their AZ directories to work on the Safe Homes program. I'll write up minutes from it with that in there because I didn't have time to do it. We're meeting with Parents for Substance Free Kids this week, and because we kind of dropped the ball and we didn't have the student government kids come like we usually do the second time this year, we would have come today, and today was so packed and we started really early. So in lieu of that, because our next meeting is after school gets out, so we can meet them then. The advocacy committee is going to sit down with them to get feedback from them this week and then report back to the board. So next year we have to plan better because we weren't really doing the two June meetings that we thought one would be after school got out. Trying to cram everything in. We had so much tonight. So, anyway, that's all that I have. Any questions? Okay,
Advocacy, didn't you have a discussion?
well, we're going to talk about that in the forums and let that out. Okay, liaison reports.
So we're ready.
Yeah, okay.
I actually have three, but I'm only actually going to do two of them. So I wanted to talk about the Municipal Alliance. Met on June 3rd, and Kathy Lime was there to talk about Project Adventure because the Municipal Alliance is awarding a $5,000 Youth Services Commission grant to the Project Adventure program. And so Kathy Lyon talked a little bit about the program. She said there are 60 peer leaders next year, all of them are juniors and seniors, and they must be drug and alcohol free. So I thought that was really good because it's a tie-in with all the drug and alcohol prevention that we're trying to do in the district. So they're looking at possibly setting up a flip card with the grant money for Project Adventure. On May 21st, the Municipal Alliance did a presentation on addiction. It was actually really good and pretty well attended. June 1st was the Twilight Challenge, which is the annual Municipal Alliance fundraiser. They had gorgeous weather and 91 runners participating. June 2nd was the post-heroin presentation for the Ridge students, grades 9 and 10. And I think the feedback from that was really excellent. This coming Wednesday, June 11th at 7 p.m. at the Town Hall, the Municipal Alliance is doing the third dialogue series about recovery, the discipline of recovery. And they're going to have recovering addicts and representatives from Al-Anon and Sunrise Detox. And then Robin already mentioned that the advocacy committee is meeting with the parent group to talk about using the AZ directory for safe homes, and that was pretty much it. And then I also attended on June 5th, I went to the Somerset County Health Services Commission Board meeting, and construction is now underway on the Career Center. Hal Dunsavage, the superintendent, has started meeting with districts to give them information. And the other thing that came up, the Secondary Academy at the Somerset County Health Services Commission is one of the 3 Gold Star schools in New Jersey for its anti-bullying program. And they said it really has reduced bullying at the school. I attended Legislative Day last week on June 5th in Trenton, and it was really quite an interesting program. And given the late hour, I did write up. I think I'm just going to send that around to the board rather than recording it now.
Thank you. And that was a question about the safe home. Who was actually trying to implement it? Was it Municipal Alliance or some other group?
Well, three groups have been talking about it.
Right.
One is the Municipal Alliance, the other is the Parents for Substance Free Kids group, and then the Advocacy Committee has also been
So
involved.
who's actually going to lead the way? Have you decided that?
Did you discuss with the Municipal Alliance since we last talked?
Well, the Municipal Alliance had been thinking of doing it through the Somerset 100 Coalition. That would have been a different implementation. And then the idea of using the AZ directory came up, and everybody really thinks that's PTOs were on board with that.
They were-
Yeah, they're okay with that.
So if that happened, the parents were substituting, kids had said that they could maintain a database if there's people that you can't enter because they go to private school or whatever, stuff like
Yeah.
that. So we're gonna meet.
We're meeting with them this week, so we're going to be talking about the details.
ABZ, you can change your format of what you see on the smartphone.
You would have a whole separate directory
Right.
for A to Z.
Yeah, we get separate.
The safe homes, only the people who signed up for it will be able to see it.
It wouldn't be just in the A to Z.
No, it would be a separate
It would
one. So
be
you know how like, you have kids at more than one school, you have more than one A to Z directory,
Right.
then you just have an additional one if you were part of the safe home.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and it really is quite a bit simpler than using the Somerset Hunterdon model.
I think it's great. Hope you do it.
Okay, we're up to board forum. I guess first, what did I do? I skipped public comments, sorry. Public comments on other than agenda. Sorry about that.
Georgiana Carroll, 51 Riverside Drive. Just a couple of comments that I wanted to make with regard to the policy report. First of all, I do want to say that we're glad that the policy committee is working on some type of random drug testing policy. I guess my first question is, at the last board meeting, it was suggested, or I guess Mr. Markarian had said that the policy committee was going to have a presentation by a school that currently does random drug testing. And I was curious whether that had ever occurred. That's my first question. The next thing is, with regard to the consequences for someone that tests positive, you know, our committee, parents of substance-free kids, felt strongly that the first time someone tests positive, that parent should be notified and that it should be in the parent's hands. We do feel, though, that if a child tests positive 4 to 6 weeks afterwards, that there should be some kind of consequence, because at that point, the parent has been notified, they have the opportunity to deal with it themselves. And if the child still tests positive, well, then there's a bigger problem. And for those of you that went to the pills to heroin presentation, it was very obvious by the students that spoke that night that they felt strongly that there should have been consequences. And if there were consequences, then probably they would not have gone down the road that they had taken. So I understand where people are coming from, that students shouldn't be taken out of sport or something like that initially. Absolutely not. That our initial thing is to try and help the student. But after that, sometimes the parents need that extra help. And the child will say, I'm not doing drugs, but they still are. And they may not be part of the suspicion base, because they may not be doing drugs during the school day. They may be doing it on a weekend, and the parent won't know. So we're looking to help the parent, not to hurt the student. And I really think that we need to realize that part. I guess that's all. Thank you.
Is there anyone else for public comment? Okay, now we're up to board forum. Before we get to the item that's on there, I was hoping that the board could just briefly discuss or give some direction for Ryan's presentation about the proposed victim and talented program and the implementation of it. Any people's thoughts?
I'll go. I thought it was a very nice presentation, more so because it was evidence-based. And I'm sure that Brian did a lot of the work, but I'm sure other people in the district, administrators participated, and I think they're very good options, I would prefer a shorter timeline. It's already been 2 years since we started this, and many years since we haven't even had a program. It's time to implement something like this, and there's no reason to continue to delay when we haven't had something. And if we can afford it, I think it needs to be a high priority.
I did not like the program. I want to know what districts are using it. I see Milburn doesn't have a program like that. Milburn is more superior test scores than we are. I think some students mature later. I think it's very important to give them the same opportunities as the ones that mature sooner. I don't like the concept. I think that to separate the kids denies the middle student a chance to see how the better students are performing. And I don't accept for a second that it helps everyone. I don't believe that can be proven. I think that's a theory. I like to know where it's being used. I come back to the move algebra down, and everybody benefits. I think the same, because we sped up the program. I think I'd like to see that done across the board in other areas. And I don't agree with separating the quote super intelligent kids, because I don't think we can identify.
Well, I'm going to reiterate the comments I made when this was provided to us in the curriculum committee. My big concerns, which I think are on the way to being addressed, is sustainability from a financial perspective. I don't want the rug pulled out from under us if our state funding is cut, so we need to make sure it's sustainable in the long term, particularly because we'd be adding headcount. Another concern is labeling. The students know who the smart kids are. I'm more concerned about the adults in our community handling it in a way that's appropriate. Obviously, this needs to be done, but it needs to be done in a very gentle and appropriate way. But I think it's a great way to address the concerns where we're meeting the needs of some of the brightest students, but also benefiting students all along the way. In fact, I'm not sure if Dr. Hyman mentioned this today, but I know we were told in curriculum that it wouldn't always be the same teacher at each grade level teaching the highest group of students. So that way, from year to year, so that way over a period of 4 or 5 years, every teacher would be trained in meeting the needs of students at all levels, thus enhancing the teaching ability of all our teachers, which I think is great for all of our students.
I would say that generally, I like the concept. I think Dr. Hyman did a great job with the presentation. But I also would want to make sure that the program would be sustainable financially. So, I wouldn't want to start implementing it and then have to cut it back. I want to make sure that we could, go in a positive direction on it, or certainly maintain it.
Well, let's make sure everyone's got a chance to go first.
Sure.
Susan?
Well, I agree with, what people have said. I am very concerned with the labeling as well. I'm particularly concerned with that Class A that has the gifted, and then it has the average kids. And I just think it's not going to take very long for these average kids to think, there's a big gap here in the class. And they're all, I think the kids are going to know where they're getting clustered. I think it's just going to be some intuitiveness developed on some of the older kids in elementary school. But I do appreciate that it's research-based, and I thought it was a great presentation. I too want to commend Dr. Hyman on that. And, this isn't my area. I've got to send it to the experts here. It's a well-researched program. But, and I have to say this, I do agree with Mike on one point. I would be really curious if there is any other school in the country that uses a model like this. I mean, cutting edge is good, but, you know, I just like to see it out there working and, you know, there's some good things about it. Because to me, it was a really new concept on how this program works.
Yeah, I thought it was a great presentation, and I happened to sit in on curriculum when it was presented there, and I was very excited about it. At that time, I did have a concern, just as Bev said, about the labeling, and, you know, sometimes it's wonderful if you're identified as gifted, but if you're not and you're very bright, you don't want that to be some sort of stigma that I didn't make it. But one thing I heard tonight, which I thought was helpful, is, you know, first of all, we don't know what the testing is going to be, but hopefully we're going to have a variety of options. So it'll not just be your test on one day, and then, you know, we'll decide it's going to be a more holistic approach. And then also, students can move, you know, up and down year by year, depending on perhaps their late birthdays, and they develop later, but it's not a fixed group, which I think is important. I think it's a great plan. I personally, I agree with everyone's concerns about the financial realities of this and the concern about how it would be sustainable, but to be honest, given the way the budgets work in the state, I don't know that we can be sure of anything. So, and it's very sad to say, but I wouldn't want to, I mean, I think we do, I think financially we would have the money for, at least from my recollection of finance committee, for 2 teachers. I think we might have, maybe we don't, but I think we might, and that would be my goal, to go with the second option, because it would be bringing this in more quickly, and you know, getting us up to speed more quickly. So that would be my preference. And you know, I would like to hope that we continue getting the funding we are, but I certainly wouldn't want to be in a position of predicting that.
Well, in elementary school, they don't really have groups for reading levels. And when the kids are separated already in K to 5 in groups, and all the kids know who is in the smarter group and who's not. So they managed to be discreet and do it in reading levels. So I think you could do the same thing in any other type of academic activity. I'm not so concerned about the labeling so much so, because also you can move from groups. So I'm not sure why that's becoming a big concern, since we already have the reading groups that have already started to replace one of them.
But those move up and down. I think what I was trying to say is that what I heard tonight was that this is also going to be a more flexible program. So it's not that you get picked in 3rd grade and that's it. I mean, that would be helpful, but if this is the kind of flexible program that I understood from the presentation tonight, I think it does. It sort of mirrors what we do with reading.
And the same thing with reading, you can move up and down in groups. So I think the model is already there. And I'm not so concerned about the labeling, because I've seen it already with the reading.
I mean, just to tag on to that, I feel like when we get to the point where there's a teacher in each building, which hopefully will be sooner as opposed to later, start off with 2 sooner, I think then that allows for a lot more flexible grouping, you know, even if they weren't in the cluster, you know, in that particular class. And we used to do it more informally when the English teacher was there and they pull kids together for certain things. You know, what I mean, it happened anyway, because it was what made sense. And I think if the teacher is in the building and the teachers have the training and they're thinking that way, it'll happen, you know, naturally more.
Well, I think if I look at the district, and I think Sean and I have had this discussion a little bit where he was addressing the PTOs and we're at, I think there's a difference in the schools. I think that Mount Prospect there's a more rigorous program than the other 3 elementary schools. And I wonder if you move that to the high school, you know, or the Mount Prospect student, this is my opinion anyway, are they the best students in high school because they got a head start? And I'm going to argue that that's kind of the way I see it. I think it's very important to have the same program, identical program. And if you give, you know, one school or one group, whether you call them geniuses or whatever, classic example here, because you have different schools, different performance levels. And I think it's a thing that could be studied and say, gee, what does the separation do? But I don't think it raises all the ships.
Okay. I was just going to say, I'm actually really glad to see that, that we have this program potentially being implemented and coming out. That Dr. Heidemann was really creative, did an excellent job of explaining some options for us. I too would like to take them out sooner than later. I am still concerned about the labeling, but if you're telling me it's not going to be as obvious as it looks like across this example classroom composition, I would be less concerned about. Otherwise, I think it's a great idea, and it's been a long time coming, and I'm happy that it gives you the talented parents group that is fighting for this is happy with what you outlined. And that it addressed that concern. Christopher?
This is hopefully the last time that somebody compliments Dr. Hyman. I think he's going to ask for a raise at some point.
We don't have the money.
But,
So there's no money for that.
definitely think this is a very good, I definitely am in favor of option 2. I think the flexibility is nice to see. I pity the teachers. They are going to be under such pressure by the parents who shall not be named. Their child is the smartest one in the school, in the universe, and should be at the highest level. And I think that's the problem. You know, we have math, getting accelerated program. I think that's the issue, especially when you have somebody who is in the accelerated program or the top level, then going to the next level the following year. That's going to be very difficult, I think, to communicate. So I think the criteria really, well, it certainly is advantageous for there to be some softness there, because you don't want it to be too rigid. At the same time, you do need some criteria so that you can easily explain the reasons for a student going into this level or this level. 1 year, and that changing the following year. So I think, but I'm really in favor of it, and I say, you know, we don't know what the future holds. So while we can do it, let's do it. Period.
Okay, so I think I heard consensus that we'll move forward and that finance will look at finances. The second option. Yeah, right, the majority of people want to move forward. So we will have, I guess, at the next finance meeting, you know, just discuss it and make sure that everyone's comfortable from a financial standpoint. Good. Okay, one more item.
Well, as Robin mentioned, we talked about this a little bit in advocacy, and it's something that keeps coming up. I think the board is familiar with it from a negotiations perspective, from a DEAC committee perspective, and our frequent conversations about the difficulty in finding time to do staff development, and also the use of pullouts, meaning that you get a substitute to go in for a teacher to be with the students while the teacher is removed from the class in order to do staff development, and how challenging that is, and how it's less than ideal. It's costly, and it also takes the teacher away from the student. So one of the things that we've been talking a lot about is, can we do something about the staff development situation, gets more time? And one of the things that I have floated out there to the board is the idea of looking at our half-day scenarios, meaning abbreviated schedules for students, and using the afternoons to create more staff development time. I'm not certain that this could eliminate the need to do some pull-out training, but it would certainly help us manage it and give us more opportunity to train staff. And when you talk about things like training your elementary teachers to be more skilled at doing gifted lessons or working with an enrichment teacher to deliver lessons to a variety of students that have been cluster grouped. These are things that you need time to work with your staff and time to train them. So I'm curious about the board's reaction to the concept of repurposing conferences at the elementary level so that you wouldn't have additional abbreviated days, but you would have the opportunity to repurpose some conference afternoons for staff development versus just adding abbreviated scheduled days and keeping conferences in total. Obviously, the main difference would be that right now we already do elementary conferences 8 days during the school year. So that's 8 abbreviated days where the students are going home. If we added 4 abbreviated days to the schedule, now those students would be going home early 12 days in the calendar year, which, you know, could be okay, but it also could be seen as a lot, which was why I've been floating the idea of getting rid of one set of the elementary conferences and repurposing that time for staff development. At the 6-12 level, obviously we don't do those conferences, so the idea there would be to just add 4 abbreviated days and convert 4 existing school days to 4 abbreviated scheduled days to provide the same time for the 6-12 professional development needs. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that. Sure.
So, my understanding is the contract negotiation was 6 hours more of instructional time, not during regular school hours, but not part of the 183. So, is that what you're talking about? Or is this in addition to?
In addition to that,
So you're looking for more instructional time?
more professional development time. Time where, right, because this is when students are gone, so that the administration can work directly with large groups of staff to do real training programs. That's the goal.
You have that with in-service training?
So we have a couple of days during the school year, and we have flex day that we can use to do some professional development. Typically, that's 1 day at the beginning of the year, and the flex day that the teachers earn on the Friday before Memorial Day. So it's a pretty limited amount of time relative to what a lot of school districts are doing. It's way short, to put it bluntly. And so we're looking to try to find ways to help our teachers be better teachers and to accomplish some of our training needs without having to do so much pulling.
But I thought you did that with the PLCs. That was the whole point of that.
Well, the PLCs, the whole point of the PLCs was not necessarily to do staff development. The PLCs are the teachers working to look at data, which they could use staff development on, to try to write appropriate goals for the students that they have. And it would be great if we could have more time to work with the teachers on training them to look at data so that they could be more effective when they're working in groups to try to look at student data and make decisions. And one of the things that we see is that asking them to do things that they haven't necessarily gotten enough training to do is not effective. So, it's one thing to say, let's get together as a group and look at student data, but if people don't feel comfortable in looking at the data and making decisions, it's not necessarily going to give you what you ultimately are looking for.
So wouldn't you have a curriculum director that should be comfortable enough to do that? That's a meeting, right?
Wait a second, I thought this was the Brian Love Fest. Now we're throwing him under the bus. No, yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, when you look at the amount of things that we're trying to accomplish with the staff, whether it's just keeping up with the things that the state wants us to do, that are important, that are required to be done, on top of the things that we want to do, it's really hard to pull together the staff to do the training that you want to do in the time that's allotted. It just is.
So now I guess I have an opinion that you want to do board members, because I was just getting questions answered,
Is your microphone on?
is it on?
No.
It's me. Can you hear me?
Do I have to get really close?
Yes.
Okay, that's what it is. I understand pulling out of K through 5 timeout, that would be understandable. However, in the high school, I would not want any instructional time taken away until after all the standardized testing that happens is over. There's a few weeks at the end of the school year that many students don't use in the high school as real instructional time. If you're going to do something like that, I would only support it if it was after the subject test, the AP test, the SAT, the ACT, all those tests. When it's all over, the kids are in school for 2 or 3 weeks. We all wonder what's really happening, but that would be the time I would even consider having something like that happen.
I agree with that argument. I think that if I understand the part testing, we're going to lose some class time to the testing. I have no problem with the elementary school if you cut back on the teacher-parent meeting, unless the parents are there. You can do a survey on that. But the high school, we're already at a disadvantage. The class time is 42 minutes, very short. The rest of the world, or at least a lot of the world, is a much longer school year. I think our kids are being penalized in this country because of the shorter period. We talk 9th grade to 8th grade day, oh my gosh. Well, that was back in the day, time on task. I think it's very important that get as much education for the kids as possible. Last time, so I agree with the high school. And I think your training is tied in with part and the Common Core and all of the things that's going to demand. You may have to do it anyway.
Do we know how the teachers, elementary school teachers feel about potentially going to parent-teacher conferences? Well, I mean, will it, see, I'm assuming it's a pretty large amount of work that goes into each conference and preparing for that conference. Would it save on their time, or is it easily, is it done this easily in a longer progress report type thing, or moving the conference rather than fall and spring more toward the winter, and if we're just going to go on more beneficial?
Well, we know that it takes them time and effort to do the conferences. So certainly reducing from 2 to 1 would free up some time for them. The timing of the conferences could certainly be looked at if we went to 1 in terms of when it occurred during the year. Certainly that's doable, but you have to think about the impact of that. One of the things we talked about was some of the events that go around the conferences, such as book drives, things of that nature. So, there's always going to be some trickle down if you make a change, but certainly districts do it differently. Some districts do phone conferences, some districts do progress reporting, some districts do conferences, some districts do combinations of all those things. So certainly there isn't just one way to communicate with parents about how their students are doing. And if you canceled conferences and you went from 2 down to 1, it doesn't mean that parents can't say, I have a concern, I want to come in for a meeting. You can always have a meeting.
And that was one point I wanted to make, is that I remember certainly at Liberty Corner, the principal always said, this isn't your only opportunity to meet with your teacher. Your teachers are always available, and I've always found that to be the case. So I'm not as concerned about going down to one conference at the elementary school. However, I do have some concerns about the less time on task in 6 through 12. And I guess there's a couple things. One, we're already losing all this time because we're doing all this testing. However, I also know you wouldn't ask for this unless you felt it was really necessary. And I do believe that even the best prepared sub isn't really a substitute for the teacher and the kind of experience you get from your actual teacher. So I guess what's kind of frustrating is that, one thing is, would this be possibly something that we could do for a couple of years while we gear up for what we need, or do you consider this to be, would this be a permanent proposal?
I don't think anything has to be permanent.
Okay.
You know, you can make changes,
Okay.
and try things. I mean, our need right now, I think, is pressing because of a lot of changes that are going on right now, and it doesn't seem like those changes are gonna go away.
Right.
So, I think that, you know, and we've been doing a lot in the last couple of years with respect to all the changes that we've been confronted with. But again, when you combine that with any other local initiatives, it's pressing. I mean, you have the faculty meetings and the department meetings, and those are stretched to the limit. And you want to do something like special training for, you know, gifted, for example. It's just a challenge to find the time to really be able to do that well and create a real block of time. What you can do in an hour faculty meeting is pretty finite.
No,
If you can create a block of 3 hours, you have an opportunity to do something more significant.
I understand that, and I guess concern that I have is that this is something that came up in our negotiations last year, and we did really try to get more time. And, you know, we were only able to negotiate, I guess, the 6 hours, and which at the time, you said, you know, wasn't going to be enough probably. I think we were looking for double, I think, or more. So it's frustrating that, you know, we thought we were going to have enough, and now we're going to need to do something more, but yet the kids aren't getting any more instructional time. And I do feel that, especially in the high school, trying to get all that material transmitted to the students a half day can really make a difference, perhaps. I don't know, we missed a lot of school this year, and somehow we made it to now, but it's just kind of frustrating that the kids are going to, that's something we really were trying to avoid in our negotiations last year, was taking less time in the classroom, and if this were to happen, we'd be doing just that. So I do understand you wouldn't ask if you didn't feel it was necessary, but it's a little bit of a frustration.
Yeah, I mean, it is frustrating. I think one thing when I think about time on task, and we've had lots of discussions about time in the classroom and the versus 9-period days. I've read a lot of studies about how much the time matters, you know, the extra time on task. And it does matter in some studies, other studies it doesn't, and then other studies say it's really the quality of instruction that matters, not the number of minutes of instruction. You know, you find all these different results. But one thing that we do notice is the quality of instruction matters. So if we think this would improve the quality of instruction, then we know that that would have a positive effect. You know what I mean? So I guess if we feel like it's that necessary, it's going to have an effect in a positive way. And on the DIAC committee and other times I've been talking to teachers, and they want professional development, and they want to become better teachers. So in my mind, that the payoff is probably worth it, even though I don't like the fixes time.
So are you looking at using 4 of the existing conference days from the elementary school, and those 4 days are mostly half days in middle school and high school? So you're only looking at 4 days, 4 days. Okay. Kind of following quick discussion, could they be timed at middle school and high school? And, what would the timing be? Could they be after kind of, the testing has come about and you're kind of gearing down for the year? Are you looking at doing them or at the beginning of the school year?
Yeah, my preference would be to do more at the beginning of the school year when it's more helpful to the rest of the school year, and spreading them out a little bit, but doing at least 2 in the fall. I was looking, I think, at October and November for the first 2 days. And then one more in the middle of the year, one toward the end of the year. So look, I mean, it's not lost on me, believe me, I understand the time issues on both sides. You know, and I understand the feedback that I'm getting, and, you know, it's fine, I can look at it some more, see if there are other ways, but this is not an issue that, by ignoring it, it's gonna go away. It hasn't gone away, and I feel like until we do any kind of creative scheduling, it's not gonna go away. You know, unless it's something that occurs through negotiations, which is great, and that's fine, and maybe it'll be a great topic for negotiations when we do that, and that's wonderful. But in the meantime, you know, our hands are somewhat tied in what we can achieve without doing pullouts, you know, and I just want to reiterate that it's a concern that keeps coming up. And, you know, maybe the thing to do is keep working at alternate solutions and live with it. I mean, we've certainly been living with what we've got in terms of doing the best we can with what we have. But I don't think we're going to get a different outcome or feel better about our PD program unless you have something that's a little bit more structured. And, you know, I can say to Sean and Brian, okay, you know, now we have this designated time throughout the school year in addition to a couple days that we've been working with. I want a PD plan. And I want a PD plan that's based on, you know, these pullouts all over the place and, you know, kind of hodgepodge. We can keep doing it to the extent that it's effective. It's less than ideal, and I'm just looking to make something that is a little bit more structured. If that has to wait until some other negotiations or time factors come into play, I understand. But I want you to recognize that it's something that is still a problem, and we need to find a way to deal with it.
Well, I think Robin made a very good point that if it increases, you know, the quality instruction, that certainly can make up for, you know, less of the time. And, so I'm not entirely against it. I didn't want to give you that impression. Yeah, I think it is something we need. So I'm open to it.
I guess I'm a little less open to it because of all of the testing that's going to be coming up in the next year. We don't actually know.
Right.
I don't think, I guess you yourself and others have said that it's unclear at this point exactly how well it's all going to work and how it's all going to be done, and when it's going to be done, logistically with the Chromebooks. So this may not be the best time to jam something else into it, maybe already pretty confused.
As an initial thing, from my understanding from listening to everyone is, because in elementary schools, the parents can always, in all K through 12, parents can always contact the teacher. So I think if you wanted to at least implement that in K through 5, I would be okay with it. However, 6 through 12, I'm definitely not supportive of this. We already give the kids so much summer homework. They're so busy already in the summer, they get a lot of summer homework, so they can prepare for things because we start school so late compared to other parts of the country. And we're catching up to take these exams, so I just can't see 6 to 5 supporting this. But, I mean, 6 to 12 supporting this, but K through 5, I guess I would support partially, and I don't know if everyone else would say, at least if you wanted to implement, you keep on bringing up the example of the G&T. If you wanted to do that, you could at least K through 5 in some of this.
Okay, my concern, my big reservation would be doing something K-5 and not simultaneously 6-12. Because now we're sending home, you know, the kids for potentially another 4 days. They're going home early, the older siblings aren't there. It could create a lot of daycare issues. So,
The same days as the conferences.
right, but if you're not canceling conferences and you're adding 4 additional days, now you just added 4 more days to the schedule.
Same as today.
Okay.
Yeah, same,
Well-
cancel the conferences in elementary.
I have a question for the 6 to 12. Are you Are you saying that if they're going to get pulled out of this training if you don't do that? So the early dismissals necessarily or not?
No, the biggest pullout issues are K-5.
Because obviously I'd rather have my kids in high school at home than sit this up for teachers. Okay.
I think what Vicky said makes sense for K-5, where you got rid of one conference, and with the caveat that, of course, you can meet with your teacher. And I know that conferences are very special to people, so that's not necessarily a popular idea, but if you need it, you need it. But I would suggest, I could be so bold as to suggest we talk about this in personnel, because I think this is something that we, talks about contract issues, and it just might be more comfortable, or it might just make sense for us to talk about, what we have now and try to figure it out. I don't know. Also, if it wouldn't be 11:30.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another day.
I'm not sure we're all on our topic meeting
Okay, well, thank you for your feedback.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, okay.
There's more?
Are there any other?
All right.
Okay, Nick was going to respond to a couple of questions from public comment, sorry.
Just real quickly, since I think some people have been waiting patiently, I think that the board discussion about the timeline for implementation for trying to move forward with Dr. Hyman's proposals, I think there was a majority here to have the finance committee look at timeline 2, see what's feasible from a financial perspective, and there was a comment about the psychology of moving kids up or down, and a lot of comments about the identification of students in both the discussion, I think, and also related to moving kids up and down. So just to reiterate what Dr. Heinemann said, we haven't gotten there yet, and that needs to be looked at, and I agree 100% with a lot of the comments that the board members made about that being a sticky issue, if you will, when we look at just the 7th grade algebra program and the challenges that we have in trying to manage those issues. That could happen tenfold in this sort of scenario. So I think that has to really be looked at carefully, and it'll be a new challenge to continue to work on. So I just wanted to try to bring some of those questions to closure. Thank you.